Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the inaugural event of the John W. Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise. And very happy to have such a good turnout of students, faculty, and people from the community. And I'm Howard Wall. I'm the director of the Hammond Institute. So we've decided to call it the Hammond Institute, probably just to keep embarrassing John that his name keeps coming up. But we thought that it was a good way to honor John's contribution and his donation to the university to allow us to set up this institute. Now, if you're asking what this institute is, our mission is to foster free enterprise and civil and religious liberty through the examination of market-oriented approaches to economic and social issues. Now, that's our actual mission statement. So some of you students, you might not have read a lot of mission statements over the years, but they're usually a bit mushy and vague. So basically, let me just clarify that a bit. Our mission is to talk about how great free enterprise is, and not just to, just for business people to become rich, but to improve the lot of the whole person, and also of the poor, the well-off, and so on. And we approach this in probably a unique way because we have three different directions we take this in. We have three centers that are parts of the Hammond Institute. One center is the Liberty and Ethics Center, and the Liberty and Ethics Center's mission is to foster scholarship on the roles of free enterprise and liberty in advancing the virtues necessary for a society that is both prosperous and just. So the key part is free enterprise as a way to get a society that is both prosperous and just. And I'll introduce the director of the Liberty and Ethics Center, is Rachel Duchant, who is a professor in the philosophy department. Probably many of you on campus know Rachel very well from her singing in the university faculty band from a few years ago. Unavailable on YouTube, it turns out. And we have another center where it's a very practical application of free enterprise, where we try to have students and other people in the community participate in the free enterprise system by becoming entrepreneurs. And the DeRee Center for Entrepreneurship has been going on for a few years now, and I'd like to recognize first Rick DeRee and his wife, who endowed the DeRee Center a few years ago. Is Rick here somewhere? And Rick is a Lindenwood graduate who runs the Book Exchange, the bookstore for campus, and was and maybe still is an adjunct teacher in the business school. And the third center is my own center. I direct the Center for Economics and the Environment, and I know what you're thinking. It's, what do you mean? How is he directing two things? Shouldn't he get two salaries? And I couldn't agree more. See? But the Center for Economics and the Environment, our mission is to look at, it's kind of two different missions, look at the environment, meaning the natural environment and the business environment, in particular for the St. Louis area. And I should note that the Center for Economics and the Environment recently changed names. It used to be called the Institute for the Study of Economics and the Environment. And it was started in 2002 by Ken Chilton. And actually, I don't know if Ken is here. Is he? And I'd like to recognize Ken Chilton for really kicking off, being the first of these centers to develop. And over time, this is the culmination so far of the things that he started here at Lindenwood in 2002. Now, I'd like to point out a couple of other people who should be recognized, who were instrumental in putting this event together and in developing the Institute. First is Dean Roger Ellis, who is the Dean of the School of Business and Entrepreneurship. Roger, where are you? And also Susan Mangels. Is she in the audience, or is she up here? Susan? She is the Vice President for Institutional Advancement. And this event, actually, although we're very excited about it, it's a little bit bittersweet personally, because I've been working very closely with Susan over the last couple of months in putting this together, and developing the Institute. And, I've been constantly been a thorn in Susan's side, and I'm sure I'll miss that quite a lot. Just as an example, Susan asked me the other day, do you have your script ready for when you start off and introduce people? And my response was, script? You'll be lucky if I show up sober. So that was just, I am sober, Susan, don't worry. But that was just to terrify Susan, so I'm going to miss that. And it's times like this I wonder why I'm not married anymore. Now, again, I thank you all for coming, and without any further ado, I'm going to have President Evans. President Evans is the president of Lindenwood University, and he is going to welcome all of you, and he'll also introduce John Hammonds and give a little bit of background on John Hammonds, who we're here to honor today. So, President Evans.
Thank you, Dr. Wall. I want to say welcome to everyone to Lindenwood University. We're here to celebrate the generosity of John Hammond in starting the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise. We have an entrepreneurial spirit at Lindenwood, one that is pretty rare in higher education. Lindenwood University is committed to dialogue, debate, and diverse ideas, and the Hammond Institute is one major example of our commitment. We are very grateful to John Hammond for his dedication to Lindenwood and providing opportunity for dialogue and debate, as well as scholarly work on issues surrounding economics, liberty, ethics, and entrepreneurship. And I'll tell you that John is himself a very successful entrepreneur, a great supporter and promoter of the free market, and also a 22-year Lindenwood Board of Directors veteran. John, would you please stand and be acknowledged? You and Barbara. Thank you. Thank you, John. I can't say how grateful we are and how much we owe you. I want to thank all of you once again for being here today, and I hope you enjoy this symposium. It will be great. Thank you.
All right, so the way this afternoon is going to go is we're going to have our main speaker, Stephen Moore, come out and give his talk, and you see his title, Prosperity and Capitalism, on the screen. And then following his talk, we're going to have two respondents, and they're going to come out, give maybe a 10-minute talk, each of them, and then we're going to reconvene out here for a question and answer session, which can be the most fun part of it all, and we need your help in making it fun. So if you have some real tough questions, I'm sure they're game. So let me introduce our first speaker, our main speaker. Stephen Moore is an influential economist and a member of the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, and we're very happy to have such a distinguished guest here today. He's very influential in the economic debate going on in the country, and that's through many different mechanisms. He founded the Club for Growth, which was a think tank for free market thought, and of course through the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and then his editorials that he writes for the Wall Street Journal, and he's appeared on many TV shows. Now, to make this seem relevant to the undergraduates, I'll point out that he has also done the Colbert Report a number of times, and also The Daily Show. So you may have seen him, and also what is it? The Bill Maher Show on HBO. I don't even know the name of it. It's too hip for me, I'm afraid. But I think you'll enjoy the talk. You may have heard Stephen Moore's interview on the radio, local radio, and I think he agrees with me that with my motto I just came up with today, which is, if you're not having fun doing economics, then you're probably not doing it right. So, Stephen?
Good afternoon, folks. It is a privilege to be here at Lindenwood, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and it's been so wonderful to see this great university, and what a beautiful campus you have here. So you should feel very privileged as students to go to such a great school, and I've met a lot of the faculty and have been really impressed. I probably give about 25 lectures on college campuses a year, and this is just a spectacular place. So thank you so much for inviting me. I am excited about the new Free Enterprise Center here. In too many universities, free enterprise is a dirty word, but of course you all know that the free enterprise system is the goose that lays the golden eggs, and that's actually been the theme of almost everything I've written in my life. We were talking a little bit about economists. You all know an economist is somebody who's good with numbers but never had the personality to be an accountant, right? So I'm going to try to have some fun with you this afternoon, talk a little bit about what's going on with the economy. Let me start by saying that my day job is I write for the Wall Street Journal editorial board. How many of you here read the Wall Street Journal pretty regularly? Thank you so much for helping pay my salary. It is a great newspaper, and I must say, I've loved everything about my visit here, except I am absolutely incensed that I see on college campus they have the New York Times, but not the Wall Street Journal. I mean, come on. My mission is to make sure that you start getting the Wall Street Journal in those newspaper stands. By the way, there's 5 major newspapers in the country today: the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the USA Today. Only one of those newspapers is making money. Anybody want to guess what paper that is? The Wall Street Journal, so we're very pleased about that. And I'm also kind of pleased to announce that I don't know how many of you have looked at the financials for the New York Times recently. That newspaper is about this close to being in federal bankruptcy court, and it just couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. Just kidding. My day job, or my night job, is, many of you probably know that Rupert Murdoch recently bought the Wall Street Journal, so we now have a partnership with News Corp and with Fox News. Any Fox News viewers in this room? A lot of you are. What would we do without Fox? Any MSNBC viewers in this? Uh-oh, you're in the wrong room. I'm just kidding. But Fox News has been a lot of fun to work with. I always say the motto for Fox News is fair, balanced, and blonde. I've met a lot of beautiful women at Fox. It's a fun place to work. And I must say, I got off the plane this morning. I got up really early to get here from Washington. And I got off the plane here in St. Louis. And I was walking through I was kind of half asleep. I'm walking through the terminal, and this beautiful woman, she just runs up to me, and she just throws her arms around me. She was so excited, and it just made my day. And she said, "I know you, don't I?" And I said, "Well, ma'am, I'm not really sure." And she said, "I'm sure I've seen you on TV." And I thought I'd confuse her a little bit. So I said, "Well, I'm not sure, ma'am." I said, "What do you watch?" And she was so adorable. She kept looking up at me, and she couldn't quite figure it out. Finally, she said, "Wait a minute." She said, "Didn't I see you on Wheel of Fortune last week?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, that was me." So let me give you one person. I want to give the students the best advice I can about helping advance your career. Most of you are going to be in the next couple of years entering the hard real world of working. And the one best piece of advice I can. How many of you in this room, and raise your hand, be honest, how many of you actually read the Wall Street Journal editorial page? Raise your hand. A few of you do, not nearly enough. So I'm going to give the best piece of advice I can give you all, the students, and the older people here too. If you want to be the smartest person in the room, and you want to know more than anybody else in the room about what's going on in America and around the world, just when you have your Starbucks coffee in the morning, just take 10 or 15 minutes and read those editorials in the journal. Now, that's a very self-serving thing to say because I write a lot of those editorials, but we have some of the best and brightest minds and some of the best writers in the country writing those editorials. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to be here today to open up this Free Enterprise Center is that our motto at the Wall Street Journal editorial page for the last 50 years has been free minds, free markets, and free people. So we have very much a free enterprise orientation. We believe in business, and we are very pro-business in our orientation. And firmly believe you'd get a lot out of it if you just read some of those editorials in the morning. So let me start by talking a little bit about why I am so optimistic about the future of this country and why I think, for those of you who are students here, you are about to enter a world where you're going to see such spectacular opportunity and progress and prosperity for this country. I think we're moving into another golden age of prosperity in this country where we're going to see just unlimited potential. And I do think, look, we've lived through a really tough last 4 or 5 years. The last year of the Bush administration, the first 4 years of the Obama administration have hardly been a picnic. This has been the deepest recession we had since the Great Depression. This has been the worst recovery since the Great Depression. So, families still haven't even made up the income that they lost during the recession. Incomes today are lower today than they were in 2001 for American families, so it's almost like a lost decade for incomes. We have still a very high unemployment rate. So you're probably wondering, why in the world would I be optimistic about where this country is headed? And I think I would answer that by saying I look at what's going on in this country, and I look at some of the industries that are really just taking off like a rocket. And I just see just boundless potential. And I want to start by talking about the one industry in America that is just going great guns like no other. There is one industry in America that almost is carrying the rest of the American economy on its back. And what industry is that? Anybody want to guess? Healthcare. Not healthcare, although that's a big growth industry. The oil and gas industry, the energy industry. What is going on in America today is the greatest oil and gas boom in the history of this country. And it is a spectacular thing to see. And by the way, it's quite ironic that this is happening under President Obama. I'm not here, by the way, to attack the president or criticize the president. I think the fact that he's got such a wonderful family, first black president, and so on, these are all wonderful things. But one of the interesting things about Barack Obama, I think we'd all agree, this is probably the greenest president that we've ever elected. And this is not a president who's very favorably inclined towards the fossil fuel industry, right? He hates fossil fuels because he's a big believer in global warming and so on. But what's really interesting about this president, in the 8 years that he will be in the White House, he will have presided over the biggest oil and gas boom in our history, which is an amazing thing to think about. And to kind of fully appreciate how important this story is, I'll just tell you a quick story about, I go to every state in this, I've been to every state in this country. I spend half of my time traveling around the country, but there was one state, continental state, I had never been to, and that is the state of North Dakota. Now, just by show of hands, how many of you in this room have ever been to North Dakota? About half of you. About the other half of you were probably like me, you've never been there. One of the pieces of advice I'd give to you, if you go to North Dakota, do not go there in February, because it is damn cold in February in North Dakota. But the reason, of course, you can all guess why I went to North Dakota last February, was because North Dakota is the epicenter of this incredible oil boom that is going on in this country. And you go to this town, I went to this little town of, what is the name of that town? It's just outside of Fargo, and it is such an amazing place because it's a town of about 25,000 people, but it's booming, and every time every week more and more and more people go into this town of North Dakota, and it is happening so fast that the official unemployment rate in North Dakota, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they will tell you that the unemployment rate is 3% in North Dakota. That is a bald-faced lie. North Dakota actually has a negative unemployment rate. That is to say, there are more jobs in North Dakota than there are people that can fill those jobs. And the reason for that is North Dakota sits right atop of something called the Bakken Shale. How many of you in this room have heard of the Bakken Shale? The Bakken Shale is the biggest new oil find in North America in 50 years. And the Bakken Shale is now drillable because of these incredible new technologies that we have in our energy field. And those new technologies are, number one, that's something called horizontal drilling, where literally we can now drill 3 miles deep into the ground, and then because of horizontal drilling, these wells can now go in any direction like a spider web, which makes the drills infinitely more productive than they used to be. And of course, the other major breakthrough in drilling technology is hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. And fracking is just an unbelievable technology. What fracking allows our drillers to do is crack through this shale rock, because the shale is like incredibly thick, and that oil and gas has been stored there literally for millions of years, and we've known it was there, but we never had the technological know-how to crack through that thick shale rock and get at the oil and gas. And what fracking allows us to do, it's a technology that allows us to drill through that rock formation and get at that oil and gas. And once you crack through, by the way, that shale rock, it's like taking a champagne bottle and shaking it up, and all that oil and gas that's been stored there, it just instantly flows to the top of these wells. So it's an amazing technology. And I have to say this, that to be against, because there are a lot of people who are against fracking. A lot of these states, you see people no more fracking and all these signs. And look, there are some side effects of fracking that we want to make sure we can do this in a safe and clean and economical and ecological way. But I must say this, that to be against fracking is like being against a cure for cancer. That's how big this is, because what fracking has done is almost overnight doubled and tripled the amount of oil and gas resources that we have access to in this country. And so what's neat about the North Dakota story is that North Dakota, ladies and gentlemen, because of fracking, there is more oil and gas in North Dakota than there is in Saudi Arabia. Now that is that's wow, right? That's an amazing thing to think about. But this is how big fracking is. Give us access to so much oil and gas. And by the way, it's not just happening in North Dakota. It's happening in Texas. It's happening in Oklahoma. California has a huge called the Monterey Shale. They haven't started drilling it yet, but it's billions of barrels of oil and gas that they have in California. And of course, how many of you have heard of the Marcellus Shale? Which is the Marcellus Shale is in West Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania and upstate New York. And the Marcellus Shale is a natural gas play, but we have, thanks to the Marcellus Shale and the hydraulic fracturing technology, ladies and gentlemen, we have 500 years worth of natural gas in this country, 500 years. So these are incredible breakthroughs. And why am I spending time telling you about it? Because to put it very simply, if we get this right, and if we just move full speed ahead with exploiting our own resources that we have in this country, our energy resources, I'd make the case that the United States of America is the most energy-rich country in the world. If we just go full speed ahead with this, there is a good possibility, and this is an amazing statement to make, but I believe it to be true, and it's not just me saying this, it's a lot of the experts in this field, that within 8 years, by the year 2020, the United States of America will move from being an energy import country to an energy export country. Now that is an amazing thing to think about it, right? Because what is the one thing that America imports more of than anything else from the rest of the world? Oil, right? We spend about $300 billion as a country importing oil from the rest of the world. And by the way, oftentimes from countries that are not very favorably inclined to the United States. Now, a lot of it comes from Canada and Mexico, which are obviously allies of ours, but a lot of it comes from countries like Venezuela, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Iran, that certainly do not have America's national security at the heart of their interests. So this not only changes our economic outlook by the fact that we'll have all of this oil and natural gas, but it also changes the whole national security outlook. It changes the whole the geopolitical situation around the world. We won't have to be so dependent and so worried about all the flare-ups that happen in the Middle East if we're not getting so much of our oil from them. In fact, we're exporting it rather than importing it. So this is a big news story, and it's a reason to feel very good about the United States. And by the way, not just because we have so much oil and gas, but when you think about it, one of the implications of America being one of the number one energy-producing countries in the world, which is already happening, is that it has huge implications for all sorts of downstream industries, many of which are industries that you all as students want to go into. Many of you want to go into high technology. This is huge for our high technology industry. Some of you may want to go into manufacturing and light manufacturing. Some of you may want to go into transportation and fields like that. All of these fields are being dramatically influenced by the fact that the United States of America now has the access to the lowest priced power in the world. And so this makes a huge difference, not just for energy, but all sorts of industries in the United States. And it's a reason why we're going to be able to outcompete other nations in the next 5 and 10 and 20 years if we move forward with this. There was an article in the journal about a month ago, so it must be true, right? That Germany, Germany, the country we always think about, German engineering, German manufacturing. There's just nothing better in the world than German engineering. There was an article about how Germany now is talking about moving many of their factories. There were 4 major manufacturing companies in Germany that are now talking about building factories in the United States and outsourcing their jobs from Germany to the United States. And you know what the number one reason they were talking about moving to the United States was? Because we have lower power costs than they do. Germany is a perfect example of a European country that's gotten involved in all these kind of dingbat green energy, renewable energy sources, which in some cases can make sense, but they're extraordinarily expensive, right? So wind power and solar power are 2 to 3 times more expensive than power from oil and natural gas, and this has given us an enormous advantage. So it's just something to think about and to feel optimistic about the country's future in that regard. The next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is kind of to give you a little sense of the history of what's happened over the last 50 years with the U.S. economy. So, because I'm a big believer, if you really want to understand where the nation is headed economically, you have to understand some of the major trends of the past. So, let me start by showing you this. This is a chart of the U.S. economy over the last 50 years. The blue line is just a standard stock market chart. The S&P 500, probably everybody in this room has seen that many, many times. There's your stock market over the last 50 years. The green line is a little bit different. What I've done with the green line is I've taken the returns on the stock market, but I've inflation adjusted them. Because most of you, when you start investing, and for those of you who are already investing, you know this, when you make an investment, you're always interested in your after inflation rate of return, not your before inflation rate of return. So what the green line is measuring is your real purchasing power. Now, what's interesting about this chart is look at this inflection point in the American economy that happened over the last 50 years. This was if you look at the huge steep decline that happened, and by the way, I'm just using the stock market as a kind of proxy for how the general economy was doing. You can see the worst period for the U.S. stock market and for the U.S. economy generally was the 1970s. That was a period of unbelievable decline for the United States. And over this period, you can see that period from about 1968 to 1982, I called it the period of the four stooges of the American presidency, right? Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Jerry Ford, and Jimmy Carter. Just doesn't get any worse than that, right? The 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And everything those presidents did with respect to the economy was wrong-headed. And then what you look at when you see the turnaround, that V shape, and when you look at the upturn, what you're looking at here in the 80s and 90s, that period, that 20-year period, is the greatest period of prosperity in the history of the planet. No country anywhere at any time since the beginning of civilization has lived through anything like what the United States went through in the 1980s and 1990s. Just to give you a sense of how much wealth was created in that period, the net worth of the United States, if you take all the assets of the country, all American households, all American businesses, all American corporations, and subtract out their debts and their liabilities, the net worth of what we might call U.S. Inc. was about $16 trillion in 1982. So here the United States is worth $16 trillion. At the top of this huge increase in wealth, then the United States wasn't worth $16 trillion, it was worth 60. So we lived through a $40 trillion increase in wealth. And by the way, let me just point out another couple of interesting things. Look at these two. Look at what's happened in the last decade. Look at what's happened with respect to the market over the last 20 years. You see the first big meltdown. This is the first big bubble that burst in the economy in 1999 and 2000. And I think a lot of you will remember what that was, right? That was the high technology bubble bursting. That was all of the big dot-coms and so on that went bust. And you can see there that about $8 trillion of wealth was evaporated as that bubble burst. And then you can see in 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7, the economy picks up steam. And then look what happened in 2008. You all remember this, right? We all lived through this. You can see what happens with the real estate crisis and all the subprime mortgages. You can see what happened in what we're now calling the Great Recession, another huge evaporation and liquidation of the wealth of American families and American businesses, another $10 trillion lost, and now we're digging that out of that. Now we're right back where we started. You can see why we're calling this the lost decade, right? Because the lost decade, we're right now, right back where we were when we started in 2000. And of course, the question that should be on all of our minds right now is, are we going to see a resumption of the kind of huge growth pattern that we had in the 80s and 90s. And by the way, not just under a Republican president, but you can see that the even faster growth spurt was under Bill Clinton, a Democrat. Are we going to get back on that path of prosperity, or are we living through this kind of period of the 70s where we have these kind of false periods of prosperity and then more bubbles burst, and we just never seem to get out of the mire that we are in? And I would make the case to you that we're going to see growth. But I want to, before I explain why, I think it's so important that you understand why it is that we saw the major turnaround in the U.S. economy. And by the way, I'm telling you all this not because I'm trying to give you a history lesson. Although I think hopefully this is a valuable history lesson, but I'm telling you this because all of these things that happened in the past are so relevant to where we are today in 2013. So this is one of my favorite charts in this presentation. I just showed this about 2 weeks ago to about 25 of the United States Republican senators, and they couldn't believe this chart, so I'll show it to you because it kind of blows you away. The green line is the highest tax rate in the United States over the last 50 years, and the orange line is the share of taxes paid by the richest 1% in America. Now, the green line is interesting because you can see in the 1970s, the highest income tax rate in the United States was 70%. 70%. And what a 70% tax rate means, by the way, is that for every additional dollar that you're earning, either as a worker or as an investor, by definition, if you're paying a 70% tax rate, out of that dollar, the government gets what? 70 cents of the dollar, and the investor or worker only gets 30 cents. And it was President Reagan and Jack Kemp and the Wall Street Journal editorial page and others who were making the case that those tax rates were so high that they were leading to disinvestment in the United States, that people weren't working as hard, that people were taking more leisure, and a lot of the investment was leaving the United States because the tax rates were so high. And so you see what happens here. The highest rate goes from 70% down to 50%. And then a few years after that, the highest tax rate goes down to 28%. 28%. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is a big, big, big deal. But that means at the beginning of the decade after tax, you got to keep 30 cents on the dollar. At the end of the decade, at the end of the Reagan era, instead of keeping 30 cents after tax on the dollar, now you got to keep 72 cents. So you follow me? The after-tax rate of return doubles by virtue of the fact that the tax rates have fallen. So it's not too surprising, at least in my mind, that once you saw that after-tax rate of return rise because the tax burden fell, you saw a boom in the stock market and you saw a boom in the economy, just as you would expect. Tax rates matter. They matter a whole heck of a lot. But what's most interesting about this, now look at the orange line. The taxes paid by the richest 1%. This is an astonishing thing to see. This is what we as economists call a paradox. As the tax rate went down, ladies and gentlemen, look what happened to the share of taxes paid by the richest 1%. They didn't go down, they went up. Wow, right? Wow. Look at this. At the beginning of the period, the top income people at the top paid about 18% of the income tax. Now they pay 38%. They went up. They went up. Now, I cannot tell you how much I wish. I wish so profoundly that sitting right here in these 4 empty seats in the front row here were Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Tim Geithner and Larry Summers. Because when it comes to these issues of taxation, with all due respect, I just don't think they have those tray tables in the upright and locked positions, right? They just don't understand this stuff. I mean, the president keeps saying we have to raise taxes on the rich to get more money out of them. Mr. President, if you want more money out of the rich people, lower their tax rates, grow the economy, and you'll get more revenues. Now, that's not just me saying that. That is not just Steve Moore of the Wall Street Journal saying that. Look at this. This is one of my favorite quotes from modern history. This is John F. Kennedy, a Democrat, who said this almost exactly 50 years ago, December of 1962, when he was trying to sell the country on a tax rate reduction. Kennedy, I have to read it to you. It is a paradoxical truth that tax rates are too high today and tax revenues are too low. This is the part I love. The soundest way to raise the revenues in the long run is to cut the rates now. Wow. Right? How many Democrats in Washington believe that today? Probably pretty close to zero. I mean, half the Republicans don't believe that. So the point is, if you want more revenues, many times you get more revenues by cutting rates and growing the economy than keeping tax rates high. Now, some people might say, well, we have to have We have to have tax rates high because we got to get more taxes out of rich people, because rich people pay, they're the ones with all the income, right? They have all the money, so they should pay all the taxes. Now, if you look at this, this is the top 1%. This is their share of income. They pay about 20, a little bit low, 20, they have about 20% of the total income in the U.S. economy. So 1% of Americans have about 20% of the income. That's a lot, by the way. That's a very large share for 1% to have. Although I must say this, the one thing about that, people in that top 1% category, and this is a kind of uniquely American thing, is that guess what? The average length of time that someone is in the top 1% is only 6 years. So people move in and out of these income categories all the time. Most of you students in this room right now, you're easily in the probably the bottom 25% of income, right? You're not making income, you're in school, so some of you are working, but your incomes are very low because you're studying. So we think, oh my gosh, you're in poverty. But the truth is, your incomes are going to go up a lot once you graduate. Now look at this though, this is an amazing thing. The top 1% pay 37%. The bottom 50% of all Americans, every American with an income below the median in the United States, they pay 2% of the income tax, 2%. And so by definition, if the bottom 50% pay 2%, then by definition, the top 50% have to pay how much? 98, right? So we have a system where 98% of the income tax is paid for the people in the top 50%, and you've got half the people that are almost paying no tax. The point of all this is to say we are extraordinarily reliant on rich people to pay the taxes in this country. We need more rich people. One last thing about this. When you talk about these evil rich people, these evil people in the top 1%, the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts and the Tiger Woods and the Hannah Montanas and people like that, right? Guess what? 75% of those people who are in that top 1% category do for a living. They own, operate, or invest in small businesses. They run small businesses. So when I debate some of my more liberal friends on this, they say raise taxes on the rich. I always say this. If you want more jobs, and I think everybody in this room wants more jobs for this country, unquestionably. If you want more jobs, think about this. How do you get more jobs if you're going to take money out of the very businesses that create the jobs in the first place? And it's something to really think about. My old boss, Dick Armey, used to say, liberals love jobs, but they hate employers. You can't have one without the other, right? You have to have somebody create a job before you have a job. So that's the tax picture. I want to show you next what's going on a little bit with money. Now, this can be this is an important part of the story, and this is for those of you who are students, this kind of economic history is something that, for those of us who are older, we lived through this. For you all, it's history. But the big story here is on inflation. Look at what happened with the inflation rate in the 1970s. How many of you in this room are old enough to remember in 1980 under Jimmy Carter when we had 14% inflation? A lot of you do, a lot of older. 1980, I got to tell you a kind of fun story about this. In 1980, I was a senior in high school, and my job was, I worked at a corner grocery store, and my job was to, I'd ride my bike over there, and my job was to take, remember before they had the barcodes on all of the merchandise? My job was to take the little sticker machine and put all the sticker prices on all the merchandise, the cans of Wheaties and the boxes of Wheaties, the cans of vegetables, all that stuff. And I'll never forget this. Once a week, I would come in, and inflation was so high, my boss kept saying, Steve, we've got to go and put higher prices on everything because, inflation was running so fast. So I would be walking down the aisle with this little sticker machine, putting the higher prices on. People would be grabbing everything off the shelves before I could get there. And I'll never forget, I would get in these tug of wars with these little old ladies. They'd want the noodles at the 99 cents, and I'd be trying to make them $1.19. Remember, again, for the young people in this room, you don't remember this, but the joke back then in 1980, remember this one is if you saw a dollar bill lying on the ground, you remember this one, I'm sure. If you saw a dollar bill lying on the ground, you pick it up because there might be something of value underneath it, right? Because the dollar had plunged so much in value. So this was killing the economy. And then look at what happens. You want to see a beautiful picture. You see the huge decline in inflation that happened under Reagan, and Paul Volcker was the chairman of the Fed at that time. And then we had the huge period of prosperity, and look at inflation. It was very tame. We lived through 2 to 4% inflation. In fact, it occurs to me that most of you here are 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. You've never really lived through inflation, right? We've had very tame inflation through your whole life, and this is one of the things that's been very good for the economy. What do you want from your monetary policy? You want the dollar to be as good as gold. You want the dollar today to be worth what it's going to be tomorrow. That's why we have a currency, right, to retain its value. Now, I want to show you something that's kind of scary if you haven't already seen it. But this is what has happened with our supply of money. Now, I know monetary policy can be a very boring subject, so please don't run for the exits. I mean, my friend Steve Forbes, who I do a lot of work with, Steve told me this trick one time. So the bane of my existence, because I travel all the time, is to get stuck in the middle seat on an airplane. I mean, I just hate that, more than anything. So what I do, I've got this trick. You can try it. It's worked every time I've tried it. If ever you get stuck on the middle seat of an airplane, start talking about monetary policy, and the whole road just clears out. You get it all for yourself. So I'm going to try to make this as quick and interesting as possible. So you can see what's happening with our monetary policy. This is how much money is flowing into the economy. And correct me if I'm wrong here, because you're the monetary expert. And you can see it grows at about 5 or 6% per year. And then look at what happened in September or October of 2008. This is the Great Recession, right? This is the period of where everything is collapsing around us. The big banks are failing. The mortgage, the mortgages are being foreclosed on. Major insurance companies are folding. The stock market is going, is like an avalanche. And you can see what happens here is we have a massive infusion of money into the economy. So the Fed is just printing the stuff and flushing into the economy, literally trillions of dollars as fast as it can to try to get Americans to spend. And that was, we don't even call that QE1, but that was that should have been QE1, the first major injection of money. And then we had what we now call QE1, which is the Fed purchased $1 trillion of mortgage-backed securities. So they went into the marketplace, they bought securities, and then they put that trillion in the market. QE2, they bought $1 trillion worth of 30-year Treasury bills, so the Fed was essentially buying the federal debt. And now we have QE3. This isn't even on the chart. QE3 is purchasing, what is it, about $80 billion, I think about $80 billion a month, are they, in mortgage-backed securities. So what we're doing is flushing all this economy into the economy as quickly as we can. We call Ben Bernanke Helicopter Ben because it's almost like, to just kind of conceptualize this, it's almost like when Ben Bernanke is doing is stuffing a helicopter with $100 bills, going over major cities and just dropping $100 bills out the window. And he's doing that to try to get people to spend, right? Now, here is the conundrum. Here is the paradox of this story. If you look at that huge, massive amount of money into the economy, what is the likely long-term effect of all that money? Come on, shout it out. What does all that money cause? Inflation, right? You know this from your Economics 100 course. You've learned that. How many of you have had at least one economics course? And most of you had. You learned this, right? What is inflation? Remember this? Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. That's what inflation is. When you see that massive amount of money, you would expect there to be inflation. But wait a minute, there isn't inflation out there. There's no inflation. Inflation rate's been growing at 2 or 3%. It's actually last year it was lower than it's been in 50 years or something like that. So this is a conundrum, right? Massive amounts of money, low inflation. Anybody have an explanation for that? Banks aren't lending it, right? And also people aren't spending it, right? We're still all as a collective society, we are still so traumatized by what happened in 2008 that people aren't spending the money. They're hoarding it. It's almost literally like people taking all this money and stuffing it under a mattress. If people don't spend the money, it doesn't cause inflation. My only point here is I think as the economy picks up, we're going to probably start to see inflation rearing its ugly head again. All that money has to be flushed out of the economy, and once people start spending it, I'm very worried that you may see a little spurt of inflation. Now, I want to show you a couple more things, and then I'll open this up for discussion. I'm going to kind of skip ahead here. This is one I find to be really kind of fun and interesting. So, if you look at the inflation rate in the U.S. economy, every industry has its own rate of inflation. Some things go up in price, some things go down in price. When you see the overall inflation rate of 3%, that's averaging everything. But of course, some things are way over the average and some things are way below. Now look at this. I don't know how well you can read this, but you see those blue pillars. Over the last 10 years, those are consumer items where the prices have actually been falling, they're not rising. Falling prices is good, right? Falling prices means that things become more affordable. So you can see here the cars and trucks, those have fallen by 5%. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, if you go into a new Ford showroom today and buy a Ford truck, the Ford truck today costs less than it did 5 years ago. That's amazing because it's of much higher quality. The same thing is happening with apparel, clothing, that's falling in price. Software, you all know this, software prices are really falling. Look at computers, they're down 75% in price. That's good for consumers. What it means is you can buy more with your dollars. Now, look at the industries, ladies and gentlemen, where the prices are rising the fastest in the U.S. economy. Let's put energy aside because that's a commodity, and if I'm right about what's happening with the energy industry, we're going to see those prices fall, not rise over the next 10 years. But look at the other two where prices are out of control the most. Education and healthcare. Education and healthcare. What do those two industries have in common? Government. Thank you, sir. Government. These are the two industries in America that are most dominated, owned by, regulated by government, right? Education in America today is about 65% government and about 35% private. The healthcare industry in America today, this is a big problem. It's 50% public, 50% private. We can't determine as a nation which direction we want to go in. But isn't that amazing? The two industries that are most run by government are the ones that prices are out of control. Now, I've got to say something about education because I have a son. I have two sons, and my oldest son goes to Northwestern University, which is outside of Chicago. I don't know what you all pay here at Lindenwood, but I will tell you this. Anybody want to take a guess at what I'm paying every year for my son's tuition at Northwestern, room board tuition? $62,500 a year. That is thievery. That's stealing, right? How do these universities get away with it? I'd make the case with this great, because I understand your tuitions are pretty reasonable here. The biggest scam in America today is the cost of higher education. It is unbelievably outrageous. And, I got to tell you the story. When my son was going off to college, it's an emotional day. He's packing his bags. I go up, to see him off, and I said, Justin, I got to just tell you this. I said, I promised when you were a kid that if I would pay for your college education, and I'll honor that agreement. I said, I am willing and able right now to make you a deal. You can go off to Northwestern for 4 years, I'll pay the tuition, or, because I wasn't that excited about him going to Northwestern anyway, it's a real liberal school, so I said, or I will write you a check right now for $200,000. You can play computer games for 4 years, and we'll both be better off. He said, yeah, that sounded pretty good. But, you got to really wonder, is college really worth $200,000? Or certainly, some of these elite schools. And the answer to that, in my opinion, is clearly no. On healthcare, I'm simply going to throw this out as something food for thought. Do we really believe that Obamacare, which is obviously in the news every day right now, and I'm not going to answer the question, but just pose this to you, does anyone really believe that having a massive new infusion of federal government into the healthcare system and putting 25 to 30 million more people on Medicaid, does anyone really believe that that's going to lead to lower costs for healthcare? Well, the answer is pretty obvious, right? It's pretty obvious except for the dingbats in Washington. Now, let me show you a couple of last things. I promise I'm going to come to an end here because I want to get some. Now, so you hear all this, you wonder, what's the point of optimism? Why am I optimistic? And this is it. This chart right here summarizes the case for an incredible future for this country, and you're going to wonder, what the hell is this? But what this chart is measuring, what I did with this study, was I looked at major inventions in the United States over the last 100 years. And what I asked is, how long did it take from the time something new was invented to the time the average American with a middle income could afford to have that thing? And so I started with telephones. Now you see that number, you see this number here, 71? Y'all see this? What this number means is that it took 71 years. 71 years from the time the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell to the time the average family could afford a telephone, 71 years. That's 3 generations, right? That's amazing. Now look at the next one, electricity. It took 52 years from the time the J.P. Morgans and the Vanderbilts and the richest people at the beginning of the century could afford electricity in their home, half a century before the average American could have electricity in their home. For radios, it took 30 years. For TV, it took about 20 years. Now look at the new things in your generation, for the young people in your generation. Look at, cell phones, 14 years, CD players, 11 years, internet, 10 years, iPods, 4 years. It's amazing, right? How many of you in this room have an iPhone? Raise your hand. Yeah, most of the kids, I think, 2/3 of the kids in this room raised their hand. iPhone is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The iPhone, when it came out of the market 5 years ago, cost $300. What are they on now? iPhone 5, iPhone 6? What's the latest? It's 5 or 6. The latest iPhone that just came out last month doesn't cost less than $200, and it's a far superior machine than the one that came out 5 years ago. And if you're nice enough to have me on campus, let's say 5 years from now, I am willing to bet anybody in this room that the iPhone will cost well less than $40, right? The price of these things just keeps going down and down and down and down. And most of you probably, it's interesting with the young people. When I give talks on college campus, I notice recently how dour and dire and down young people are. Oh my God, this is a terrible time, the economy's horrible and everything's going wrong and the polar ice caps are melting and all this stuff. And I say to these kids, you think things are so terrible. How many have a cell phone? Everybody raise their hand. How many of you have a laptop computer? Everybody raise their hand. How many of you internet? Everybody raise their hand. How many have iPod? Half the kids listen to the iPods while I give my lectures, right? So they have them. And so then everybody, you're a smarter audience than most of these kids, but then they look at me like, duh, of course we have these things. Because your generation, you think living without cell phones and laptop computers and the internet is like the Fred Flintstones era, right? So I just got to show you this because I think it's an amazing thing. What movie is that? Wall Street. That's Michael Douglas playing. For those of you young people in this room, if you've never seen the movie, it's definitely worth seeing. It's a period piece about the 1980s. Michael Douglas plays the part of Gordon Gekko. He's the rich fat cat on Wall Street. Ladies, that movie was made in 1987. Look at that thing he's got in his hand. It's like a brick with an antenna coming out of it, right? Look at that thing. Now here's the amazing thing. Does anybody, I bet nobody in this room can tell me that, you probably know this, so you can't answer this. Anybody want to take a guess at what that thing that he's got in his hand, I went back and looked, in 1987, what that thing cost? $4,200. $4,200. Now they damn near give them away for free, right? And so this is the point I'm making. This is what is so exciting about the future that you all face. And I'm not just talking about electronic gadgets. Of course, I would make a bet, by the way, in 10 years' time, everybody in the world, even the poorest people in Africa, will have an iPhone, right? Because it'll be so cheap to make these things. And that's going to raise living standards everywhere. But what you're going to see over the next 20 years is spectacular progress, not just in these kind of, gadgets. We're going to see cures for cancer, heart disease. We're going to see, cures for, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, all of these terrible things that have stricken humanity for thousands and thousands of years. You're going to see incredible improvements in terms of our ability to do manufacturing, all these things. It is going to raise the living standards like you never saw. So, to cut for the chase, what is the one thing that could hold all this back? This incredible technological digital age revolution. And I'd make the case to you, the single biggest thing that you all need to worry about is this massive increase in government spending. Government spending is out of control. And you know that as a consequence of this, the national debt is out of control, right? We've seen the national debt. I don't want to bore you with these statistics because most of you know them. But over the last 5 years, the last year of the Bush administration, the first 4 years of the Obama administration, the United States government in 5 years borrowed almost $6 trillion. Now, to give you a sense of that, $6 trillion is more money than the United States government borrowed from 1776 through 2000. So in 5 years, we borrowed more money than it took to finance the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, and the Cold War. I'm aghast at how much our country has faltered. I have this bumper sticker on my car that says, "Thank God Nancy Pelosi doesn't know what comes after $1 trillion," right? Because the numbers are so big here. And there is a belief among a lot of people, and this is another kind of important lesson for you to understand. Government spending does not create jobs. Government spending does not stimulate the economy. We just spent $800 billion on this massive experiment 4 years ago to try to revive the economy with this stimulus government spending, and it didn't work. We actually saw the worst recovery from a recession rather than the best after we spent all this money. And the reason that government doesn't cause economic growth and does not cause prosperity is all economics, in my opinion, comes down to one statement, one brilliant statement by one brilliant economist made about 50 years ago, the greatest economist of the 20th century, and I'm talking about the great Milton Friedman. And what Milton Friedman said, and I think, as I said, all economics can be condensed into this one statement. How many of you heard this one before? There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, right? There ain't no such thing as a, what did Milton Friedman mean by that? There's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, what he meant is very simple. If the government spends $1, the dollar has to come from somewhere, right? I don't think there are any little kids in this room, so I can say this to an adult audience. There's no tooth fairy out there, right? There's nobody passing out free dollars. The government can only get $1 and spend it if it takes from me, right? It can take $20 out of my wallet and give it to you, sir, but I would submit to you that that does not stimulate the economy. He has $20 to spend, he's $20 richer, I'm $20 poorer. The net effect of this transition is probably zero or negative. And this is what so many people in Washington believe. What we need to be doing now is cutting government spending and debt and bringing these tax rates down to let the private sector explode. Last story, and then I'm eager to hear from our respondents. I believe the biggest challenge that our country faces, just to summarize all of this, is will the United States of America, this great, 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 great country of ours, will we continue to be the world economic superpower over the next 10 and 20 and 50 years? Because for all of our lifetimes, at least since the end of World War II, the United States has been the unrivaled economic superpower, right? We have led the world in every single area of innovation and incomes and job creation. We have been an economic powerhouse. We are the hub of the world economy, and every other country is a spoke. And that's the way it's been for 75 years. But for the first time in any of our lifetimes, we now have an honest-to-goodness rival. Who is that? China, right? China is catching up. What's happened in China, if you want to see the power of the free enterprise system, free markets, look at what has happened in China in the last 25 years. This is a country for 500 years couldn't even feed itself. I mean, Mao Zedong starved to death 200 million of his own people, right? This is a country that has lived at subsistence level existence for hundreds and hundreds of years. They move more, they're not totally capitalistic, but they've moved much more towards a free enterprise system. And by moving that needle, my God, the place has exploded in growth. They've averaged 12% growth now, for 25 years. Their living standards are doubling every 15 years. It's an amazing phenomenon. And we had this economic minister from China visit us at the Wall Street Journal editorial board about a year ago. This is one of the fun things about working in the Journal. We have all these muckety-mucks from all these countries come and visit us, and he's telling us about all the wonderful things that are happening in China, and their growth is way up like this, and he's looking at us, and we're like this, and they're up like this, and he's going on, and then he said something at the end that just stuck in my craw. He said, by our computer models in Beijing, he said, we believe in 7 years, by the year 2019, we are going to catch the United States. And he said, our GDP is going to be larger than yours is. And then he said, he didn't put it quite like this, but he was very arrogant. He said, and once we catch you people, we're just going to stampede past you and look at you at our rearview mirror as we leave you in the dust. And you don't know me very well, but if you cut me, I bleed red, white, and blue. So I couldn't stand this much. I just kind of sprang out of my chair. And I said to this gentleman, I said, sir, I just want to salute you. What's happened in China is one of the great economic miracles of human history. And you've moved $500 billion people out of poverty. Amazing stuff is happening there. But I said, not in my lifetime, sir, will China surpass the United States. And the reason I can tell you that with all assurance, sir, is because our Chinese are so much smarter than your Chinese. And he didn't like that very much, right? But it is true. And the one big advantage that we have over the rest of the world is, especially countries like China and Japan, is we are a melting pot, right? We have people from all over the world, the best and the brightest. You all, when you get into the workforce, you're going to be competing from the best and the brightest people from all over. You go to Silicon Valley, you go to these technology centers, it's like the United Nations at these places. And that only happens in America. But the point of that story is we better as a nation start taking economic competitiveness seriously. And we've got to fix these institutions that are broken in Washington. The tax code, the litigation system, the healthcare system, the school system, the education system, so that every kid can graduate with a high caliber degree and in a knowledge-based industry. And if we can do that, if we can fix those failed institutions, you're going to see over the next 20 years the biggest boom you ever saw. Thank you very much. It's been a great privilege to be with you tonight, and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Now, when you started talking a little bit about the Fed, and I'm a former Fed economist, as you know, so that may have kept you. None of it's my fault, but I do see some of my former colleagues in the audience, and how many of you would like to know who they are? So you can go and harangue them. All right, I'm not going to tell you where they are or who they are.
I just want those people in the Fed to assure us that there is a way out of this.
Well, you can ask them. I'm not going to venture a guess at that. Now, we're very happy to have as our first respondent, we have from the Show Me Institute, which, if you're from Missouri, you know is one of the leading think tanks. I think it is the leading think tank in the state of Missouri about public policy issues, and particularly with economic issues. And we're very happy that Brenda Talent, the executive director of the Show Me Institute, is here. And you might be familiar with Brenda's work because she appears in a lot of local media. In fact, she's doing Donnybrook, which, does that play tonight? Which will be on TV tonight, where she'll be straightening out all the guys on Donnybrook who usually are blathering on incorrectly. But Brenda Talent from the Show Me Institute will give a response, and not necessarily responding directly, but giving her own perspective on the economy and other things, local and national.
Good afternoon. I'm going to do a little housekeeping here just to move this because I have my notes. I would characterize Stephen as a glasses half full kind of person. So now you get to hear from a glasses half empty kind of person. All right. I look at our country and I say we're a country that has endured 5 years of the grossest fiscal irresponsibility, and both parties of our government are responsible. You can applaud if you would like. We have 5 years of blaming the marketplace for the failures of government, 5 years of the worst economic stagnation since the Great Depression, 5 years of diminished expectations and growing passivity, and 5 years of ever-increasing lawlessness in our executive branch that thinks it can have the right to pick and choose which parts of the laws it enforces and which part it ignores. And I ask, is there anything that we can do to stop the undoing of America? That's sort of a glasses half empty kind of question, isn't it? Is there anything we can do to stop this train wreck that's waiting to happen in Obamacare? Is there anything we can do to return to the kind of economic growth that's so desperately needed to provide jobs and opportunities to what's becoming a lost generation of idle or underemployed young people? Well, I believe there are things we can and must do, and one of the most important things is we have to educate our young people in the value of free enterprise, just like this Institute's going to do. To put it bluntly, we need to be sure that the future generation, those of you in this room, don't merely aspire to be Julia. Do you remember Julia? Well, she was a cartoon figure who appeared in the president's campaign in 2012. Julia had a baby, she had a career, she didn't have a husband, she didn't need one. At every step along the way, the great partner in her life was the federal government, which took care of her every need. Now here's what those ads didn't tell you about the Julias of the world. Kids born into families without a father are roughly twice as likely to drop out of school, twice as likely to have emotional or behavioral problems, more than twice as likely to be arrested for a juvenile crime, 3 times more likely to do some jail time, and 50% more likely to experience poverty in adulthood. That's what happens when you take the dads away from the kids and you give them government instead. Let's be honest. In my view, there hasn't been a lot of good news coming out of Washington. And unlike Steve, I don't think there's going to be any in the immediate future. But I would like to share some good news. And I think this, Mr. Moore would agree with me. The battles for liberty isn't just in Washington. They're in our communities and our states. And I'm going to tell you, major battles for the hearts and minds of people are being fought and won in places just like Missouri. And I want to share a few of those places with you. In Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker took on the public sector unions to get his state's budget under control. The progressives tried to recall him, and they failed. Under Governor Walker, unions are now accountable to their members through regular elections on whether to retain their representation. According to one poll in Wisconsin, an astonishing 83% of union households want the freedom to be able to say yay or nay on union representation on an annual basis. In Louisiana, kids who've been trapped in failing schools now have the ability to go to a school where they can succeed. And other states like Arizona and Pennsylvania have also responded to the needs of kids in poorly performing schools. And they've been very creative in coming up with ways for them to go to schools where they can succeed, even private schools. In Kansas, Governor Brownback did the unthinkable. He cut their income tax because he believed that if people kept more of what they earned and were able to invest it, they would generate a better economy for Kansas. And here in Missouri, our people voted overwhelmingly against Obamacare because we want to be in control of our health care, not the federal government. Within the state of Missouri, the Show Me Institute is the only free market think tank. We work for school choice, we work for eliminating the state income tax, and we oppose what we consider to be the insidious spread of big government thinking and central planning at all levels of government. We are the only free market think tank here in this state, but there are others like us in the other 49 states. We're guided by the knowledge borne out by more than 200 years of American history that free markets work better in creating wealth and opportunity than any state-controlled or planned economy, and that the genius and compassion of a free people will do more to come up with solutions that will fix the problems that we face in this county, this country, and our nation than government. I am looking forward to the opportunity to partner with the Institute for Free Enterprise because I think we share many values, and I think we can make a major difference not only in this state, but in our country. We want to be a resource for all of you, so please check us out at showmeinstitute.org. I'll give a little plug for our website. I'd like you to join us in this fight of defending liberty against those who see government as the master rather than the servant of the people. And the battle we're engaged in, the battle of ideas, the battle for freedom is ongoing. It's not going to be resolved in the next 3 years. It may not be resolved in the next 30 years. But there are going to be very many important battles that we're going to be engaged in within the next several years. And I do believe the outcome of those battles will tell us about the outcome of America's future. And so I guess this is where I go to the glass is half empty. This is the first time in my lifetime that I feel the future is in real doubt. I can't close this speech by pretending that it's morning in America. Decisions have consequences. Nations, like men, reap what they sow. The last 5 years, we've sown a bitter seed. The fruit it's going to bear in the future years, we're going to test our unity, our charity, our wisdom, our perseverance, our faith, as this generation of Americans have never been tested before. Now I'm going to quote one of my favorite figures in history, Winston Churchill. Do not suppose that this is the end. This is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first sip, the first foretaste of a bitter cup which will be proffered to us year by year, unless by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor, we rise again and take our stand for freedom as in the olden time. So I urge each of you to rise, to take a stand. As Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. I want to thank John Hammond for taking a stand here in Lindenwood. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. And our second respondent, I'm going to say a very interesting name here, and not just Joe's name. You might recognize the name of his chair that he holds at the University of Missouri. But I'd like to welcome Joseph Haslag from the economics department at Mizzou, where they stole our school colors, also gold and brown, and we have lions and they're tigers. Not a coincidence, and Joe will defend that later. But he is the Kenneth Lay Chair in Economics at the University of Missouri in Columbia, and he also is a leading voice about economic policy in Missouri from another economist who is not afraid to get out into the public and communicate. So here's his big chance.
See if we can I've got slides because my wife told me you got to have slides, and my wife is very wise, so I listened to her. So let's see if I can get. We might have to have the fix-it guy. Okay, there it is. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to speak at the inaugural event of the Hammond Lecture Series. And more importantly for me, it's wonderful. I haven't taught a big principles class in a few years. At MU, you'll start off with 500 people, 400 or 500 people in a lecture for the first few weeks. They'll show up before the first exam religiously. They'll take the first exam, and then suddenly I'm down to 175. So what I've learned is I won't test you while I'm here for the next few minutes. So I don't know if it's causal, but we'll figure that part out later. What I want to do, Steve has spoken consistently about the role of economic growth. He's talked for many years about it, and I anticipated that he was going to have something to say about economic growth here. So I don't know if I'm going to respond so much as try to provide some backstory. The backstory is, where does growth come from? We talk about this all the time, right? Everybody talks about we need to get the economy growing faster. We need to do these kinds of things that are going to make us better off, so that things are going to be that we can point to a sense of pride if we want to compare ourselves to China or to the rest of the world. But at the end of the day, we're kind of self-interested people where we care about where our standard of living is going to be, and that economic growth is just a measurement device that says how we're improving over time. So if there's a critical question that the policymakers are going to face, I'm going to start off with the presumption. I don't know if this presumption is right, but it's the one that makes it easiest for me to get started in a talk like this. And that presumption is going to be that policymakers have our best interest at heart. Just bear with me, okay? Policymakers' goal is to put forward a set of rules in which the people that they govern, that they help to govern, are going to flourish at the highest level possible. So that's going to be the idea, that the average citizen is going to have the highest level of highest standard of living that they can. So where does this come from? Well, over time, what we're talking about innovation. Ultimately, the engine or the source of all economic growth, Steve pointed this out in some brilliant slides when he was talking about how cell phone use has changed and the technologies that are going on. I'm just going to lump it together in one word and call it innovation. What are we talking about really at the bottom line of this? So innovation is just measuring, or technological progress, which is just an economist's fancier word of saying this. Technological progress is the idea that we can take however many hours we're going to work across all the people who are willing to work. Sort of, this is a long run thing, so I'm not going to talk about cyclical fluctuations. We're going to talk about these long run goals, and technological progress takes that putty clay that we call labor, which is the amount of hours worked, and transforms that into more stuff. Right? So think about this, the tractor made people a lot better off than the horse and plow. I was able to get a lot more acres tilled and ready for planting than I could if I was just going to use a horse and a plow, and I was dragging my plow behind that. So we all have that's just a concrete example of, and there are literally millions, maybe billions of innovative ideas that are going to come about that can give rise to this technological progress. So innovation or technological progress is the very thing that we're talking about when we're talking about sources of, or engines of growth. Growth matters a lot. So we can all, maybe you've seen this in class, maybe you've seen it, but compounding, right? Growth matters because it is compounding wherever we start. We get a bigger effect from this compounding rate. So I just put up a little numerical example, right? If you start with your income of $50,000 today, and your income is going to grow 2% a year for the next 25 years, you're going to have an income of $82,030 after 25 years. With just a 0.5 percentage point faster growth, it seems trivial, it seems like measurement error in many cases, your income goes from $82,000 to $92,000 after 25 years. And we sort of understand that that's how compounding works. That's all it's going to be, is just a mathematical operation, but it's an extra $1,500, $1,600, or $10,600 more in income that we'd have a year just by having the experience of faster growth. So now we know that growth matters, and we know why just a little bit faster growth is a good thing. And let's see if I can get this to... And then the question, so we can turn to questions. Where does this innovation come from? So this is, think of Steve's last slide about all the technological progress that he identified. Where does that stuff come from? So that stuff comes from ideas. Everybody's got an idea of how can we, so in industry, if you're working in management, one of your jobs is how can we do things better with fewer resources? Everybody's got an incentive in that setup, in a free market setup, to kind of generate these ideas and to make their firm more profitable. Ultimately, if they're viewed as being a consistent contributor to those sets of ideas, they're going to get bigger raises. Everybody's going to be better off. Sometimes these ideas come from labs, right? There is basic research and development kinds of things that are going on. Sometimes they come from communities, right? We get together in one community called the business that we're in, and new ideas foment, and some are implemented. Not all of them work. Right? Trial and error is part of the process. Sometimes we have to be willing to fail, but if we're continuing to promote new ideas and kind of testing them out, whether they're in the lab or whether they're in our office, insurance, we're selling insurance, can we do it better at a lower rate? Those ideas are the very things that we're talking about when we talk about growth. Those are the engines of economic growth. The last bullet point here, it just says sometimes with 3 dots with an ellipses. I can't list all the various ideas and mechanisms that are going to be available for generating these ideas and the economic growth that they're going to foster. Now, we've got some puzzling data, though, that we have to look at. So we talked about China, and we talked about their rapid rate of growth. Just as a quick aside, one thing about China, China started off really poor, right? Their economy may be big in scale, but you got to remember they've got 1.6 billion people. We've got about 330 million here in the US. If you divide their total amount of goods and services produced by their population, they're still looking at about $2,500 or $3,000 per person, per capita real GDP. In the US, it's about 46,000. So they're not going to catch us in 7 years. They're not going to have the same standard of living. So one quick answer would have been for Steve to say, I don't care if your scale is big, you're still got a bunch of poor people in your country compared to what we have, and you can catch us maybe in 100 or 150 years if you can keep it up. That would have been my response, but Steve also had a good one as well. Now, here's the puzzling part of the data. Within the United States, right, we've got a lot of the same laws that exist across the country. We've got the same kind of federal judicial system that we can turn to. We've got the same army that's defending every one of the 50 states, right? The U.S. Army and the Navy don't defend New York more than they defend Missouri. We've got all these shared resources that we have across. I just want to point something out that's puzzling to me. So if you look at Missouri now, just the state economy, It ranks 37th in per capita real GDP. What's even more puzzling and a little bit more sad to me is if you look at what, and I misspelled Missouri, but that's what you do when you come up with slides on the fly. Missouri, if you look at it, since 1997 ranks 47th in per capita real GDP growth. Now, to me, that's kind of puzzling. I mean, 25th, I could understand, or maybe all the states are just within a few percentage points of one another, or a few tenths of a percentage points, or a few hundredths of a percentage points, because we have all these shared commonalities in terms of our legal structures and all sorts of things. And yet something's going on in Missouri that's causing this, to me, the puzzling part, causing our state to decline. I drew this up within states within the United States simply so that I could control, kind of, for all different kinds of policy variables that are going on. We share so much that the states shouldn't look that different from one another in terms of our shared political history. The puzzling thing is, why is Missouri 47th? What's going on here that's causing this to occur? And really what I'm trying to get you to think of is, once you begin to start looking at the data on growth, it's hard to think about anything else. I'm going to quote another great economist from the University of Chicago, Robert Lucas, when I say that. He's got this great line that I paraphrased exactly on that. So what is it that causes these things to slow down? Well, we know what the engine of growth is. We've got some data on what's going on in terms of growth. And I'm only going to disagree with Steve on one point, one kind of important point, and I'm going to do it in what I think is going to be a somewhat sympathetic audience. So, is there any kind of spending by a collective agency, government is all I mean, that would help us grow faster? Is there anything that they can do? Steve's exactly right. A dollar spent by the government is a dollar spent by that could have been spent by somebody else. But one of the things that, and again, my spelling is horrible apparently, or I was using Latin, frutis is what I was using. What is it where do these ideas come from? Well, as I said, some of them are going to come from basic R&D that's done at a university. Notwithstanding Mr. Hammond's generous gift to get this lecture started, R&D, research and development, has a public good aspect. When I create a new idea, the first thing that I do in a scientific community is I submit it to a journal. I write it up and I submit it to a journal. And so that idea is now spread, and they vet it. So they tell me whether it's a good idea or it's a bad idea. And once it's vetted and it's published in the journal, then everybody has access to this. And now the way, with technological progress that's gone on, the turnaround time in most scientific journals can be as short as 6 to 10 weeks. So from the time I get lab results on how to split an atom more efficiently to the time it's published and everybody else knows it can be from the time of June 1st to August 31st, quite easily. That public good aspect means that in order to get more research and development done, sometimes you have to take some of the public goods and spend it on that. I could say the same thing about roads, right? We need roads to connect us at a lower cost. But this is one of those things, if we want to talk about cell phones in 5 years or 10 years, we need basic research and development to generate the ideas that is going to give rise to this growth. And one of the ways in which we can promote that growth is through some carefully identified, useful, underline that word 3 times, useful means of public spending. So markets work, but you also have to fuel the markets in some important ways. I'll take all my bad spelling off, and all I'm going to say now is hopefully provoke some thought and start the Q&A process off by thinking, what is it that we're talking about here today? We're almost exclusively talking about how our standard of living is going to change over time, what makes an economy grow. By looking at what makes an economy grow, we have to turn to the basics. The basics are ideas and innovative ideas. And those innovative ideas come not only from our own sweat, the sweat of our own brow, but we also need resources to do that. And remember, growth spreads across not just the person who comes up with a new idea, but spreads across the entire society. And so there may be some wisdom to thinking about the role of thinking about, well, if we have to have a government, they have to protect our property rights, they have to help us build roads that will connect one city to another. They also have to help us with the ideas of the mechanisms of generating those basic ideas in the form of basic research and development. That's why you guys many of you, the students at least, are going to colleges, because there's the discovery phase, which is what basic R&D does, but there's also the dissemination phase. You've judged it, and I think rightly so, based on all the evidence I've seen, that it is worth going to university because you're going to be better problem solvers, you're going to learn history, you're going to learn writing skills, you're going to learn a broad set of attributes, you're going to hone your own human capital, and you're going to be worth more on the market. Those skill sets are also the ones that are going to help you come up with new ideas that are going to make all of us better off. Thank you.
You don't need the non-economist here.
She's afraid of economists. She's leaving. Actually, Brenda has to go for a taping of that show that's on tonight, so
It's just like one of my students.
she had to has to leave. But we still have. I'm not going to answer any questions. I'm just going to direct the questions. So what we're going to do now is have a question and answer period. If you have any questions at all for anybody about anything, do we have our ushers to take the microphones? My rules are, okay, if you have a question, you're supposed to walk up here? Is that?
I guess somebody's got to go first, so I will. Steve, I really appreciate you taking time to come. I really enjoyed your presentation, and although I'm terrible with names, this doctor here. So, you said, and I would agree, that one of the primary missions should be to educate people on the basics of how our economy works. Is there any effort to do that with the people who make the policies about how our economy is working?
I didn't get to the
Is there any effort? Because what I hear is that if you look at the economic knowledge of the people who make the policies in our country, it's not very high.
Right. That's a great question. The question is, do these politicians understand these things? I would bet that, look, I think most of what you heard from me and from these other two distinguished speakers, it's pretty common sense, right? This is not brain surgery about how you make an economy grow. You keep your taxes low, you keep your government under control, you let the free enterprise system sprout and businesses to be created, and the government does what it has to do, but it basically stays out of the way. And if you do that, that is, as I said before, that is the goose that lays the golden eggs. So why won't politicians do that? Why won't they just stand out of the way and let the free enterprise system continue to create the kind of wealth that has made America the richest country in the history of the planet? And I think there's two problems. One is that the kind of people who run for office in the first place don't really understand that they are talkers, they're not doers, right? What we need, let me put it like this. If you look at Washington today, and you look at, what do you think 90% of the politicians, what do you think they do for a living when they're not politicians? They're lawyers, right? They're lawyers. And lawyers don't create things. So without, I don't want to offend anybody in the room that might be a lawyer, but the truth is that these are not people who create businesses. So one of the things I think we really need in Washington, I feel so strongly about this. I mean, again, I'm not here to try to denigrate or attack the president. Why doesn't the president understand how to create jobs? Why doesn't he? Well, one answer is, how would he know? Right? I mean, how would Barack Obama know how to create jobs? Not only has he never started a business, he's never even worked for a business, right? So the whole idea of how you start a business and how you employ people and how you meet a payroll, that's an alien concept to Barack Obama. But guess what? It's an alien concept to 90% of these dingbats in Washington. They don't understand these basic promises. That's why they think they're helping when they're hurting with things like Obamacare. I mean, my goodness, Obamacare. How many of you in this room know have ever heard of the term of a 49er? Now, a 49er, I'm not talking about the San Francisco 49er. What is a 49er?
Someone with a business who keeps it under 50.
Exactly. These are businesses that hire 49 workers and they stop. They come to a hard stop. I've talked to a lot of businessmen and women, you probably too, who've actually have 60, 65 employees. What they tell me is October 1st, when this new law takes effect, they're going to fire 16 workers to get up below 50. And why are they doing that? Because Obamacare law affects businesses with more than 50 workers, so they're going to be below 50. Anybody know what a 29er is? You can't answer this question, I know you know. A 29er is a business that hires workers, but for 29 hours a week or less. Now, why would they do that? Because the Obamacare law says that if you hire for somebody more than 30 hours a week, all of these new mandates and regulations take place. Businesses aren't stupid, right? They respond to the things that government does. And think about this. How is it, if you're trying to feed your family, if you're middle class, how are you going to feed your family and pay your bills with a 28-hour-a-week job? Right? I mean, you're not. You're not. This is a real tragedy that we're seeing unfold because of this law that is actually incentivizing businesses to hire fewer workers. And when I mentioned Barack Obama, it's 90% of these people in both parties had no idea how to create a job. So we do need economic education and financial education for the members of Congress. I want to make one point that I meant to say before, which I think is so critical. For the students in this room, how many of you in this room who are a student, how many of you aspire sometime in the next 5, 10, or 20 years, sometime during your career, to start your own business? Raise your hand. Well, that's awesome. Because I'll tell you this, and how many of you in this room who are not students, some of the older people, how many of you did start your own business? I mean, am I wrong? It is the most rewarding thing you can do, right? To start your own business. And it is frightening, it's scary, right? I've started 3 businesses. The first 2 businesses I started failed. And that's the way it is. 2 out of 3 small businesses, they fail. But the one that I did create that worked, it was an amazing experience. And, I had 20 people that I was employing, and there's no better feeling of self-fulfillment in the world than to create your own business and to do something and create a service. When you're talking about the innovation process and where do these things come from, they come from the spark of an idea and the entrepreneurial spirit that is embedded into the DNA of Americans and the immigrants who come here. And I just want to say, for those of you who raised your hand, God bless you, because there is no higher calling in life, in my opinion, than to start your own business and to give a paycheck to other people. So I'll stop there and turn it over to you on that one.
So I don't want to take long. I think Steve gave a great answer. I'm going to blame partly my profession, partly the way we teach economics. Right. So much of what you see if 50 or 60% of college students take econ classes, they take at most 1 or 2, principles level. The principles level textbooks that you see keep talking about, at least when they talk about aggregate economic activity, keep talking about a multiplier. So a big chunk of our population has been raised on the idea that if the government spends $1, that magically gets multiplied into $2.40 of extra stuff. That's not the way the world works. Modern economics has learned that. We've developed tools and techniques to sort of verify that is. What matters is what's the rate of return. If $1 is spent, what's it spent on? Is it either giving me value because I get to enjoy a bigger TV, or is it being spent on something, investment in new and innovative kinds of capital and new machines and new ideas that are going to offer a higher rate of return? We've got those mechanisms to explain how the world works, but we haven't quite convinced. I will put a shameless plug. I have a co-author at the University of Missouri, Chris Otrock, and I are working on a textbook that will provide that kind of framework and help people to understand how the world works dollar for dollar style as opposed to multiplier style.
Just to follow up on your point about our profession, and I think the 3 of us on the stage right now are all economists, but just to give you a sense of how poor some of the economic teaching and thinking is, in that rag of a newspaper, the New York Times, their lead economic commentator is a guy by the name of Paul Krugman. Now, Paul Krugman has a Nobel Prize in economics, and he wrote a column last week, I am not making this up, that when we expand food stamps and give more people welfare benefits, that stimulates the economy. right? So, my goodness, everybody should be on food stamps, right? I mean, the recession would go away. If we just gave free food to everyone, we wouldn't have a recession. I mean, what kind of a dingbat would say that giving people food stamps stimulates the economy? You don't stimulate the economy by putting more people on welfare. You stimulate the economy by putting more people to work. But that's what we're up against every day. I always say, thank God for Paul Krugman, or I wouldn't have a job, right? Because the guy's so stupid. Right.
Well, so there's a big boom ahead because we just set a record for the most people on food stamps ever.
Yeah, exactly. 48 million.
Okay, question.
Hello. I've noticed from a combination of all three speakers that there has been an interesting cultural underlying theme with Americans about how there's government dependence that America is now having more than ever before. And so I was wondering, how would this cultural shift of that we think government intervention is good affect our innovation capacity? Because it seems like, as my generation, most of us go through public schooling, which is government, babysitting, and then you go into universities, which some can be a bit like babysitting, and then you expect us to be able to innovate and use our own brains, and that seems kind of odd. So this cultural sociological shift I think we're having is what I'm kind of getting from the underneath principles. I believe Ms. Brenda spoke of a ethical something, I can't remember exact phrase. And I think that might be a more fundamental underlying problem, is that there's a culture shift. So how would you address that?
Do you want to take that on?
Yeah, thanks. No, look, I don't think it's I don't think it's a cultural thing. I think there could be some policies that have been set in place that look like a cultural thing. I don't think the cultural thing is the underlying cause. It's a proximate cause, the difference between those two. Look, I think people aren't that different across the world. They respond to the rules that are set in front of them. They may come with some cultural biases, but ultimately they're trying to find ways to enhance their standard of living and the next generation's standard of living. Their own because they're self-interested, and probably for their kids too because they're self-interested. We're not that different across the world at a basic level, but boy, you can see how different sets of rules are going to give rise to different kinds of outcomes. So I think you guys are just as innovative and maybe more so than, hopefully more so, because we've got a lot of catching up to do compared to where we could be in the U.S. But
I was thinking about your question. I wanted you to go first so I could think about it because it's a good question. And this is not a direct answer to your question, but I think it is important. Last week on Saturday, I wrote a story. I did an interview in our editorial page, a long interview with a guy by the name of Bob Funk. Did any of you read that story? A few of you did. And if you didn't actually, it is self-serving, but Google it and read it, because if you're thinking about what you're going to do with your career. Bob Funk is the biggest employer in the country. He runs an employment agency that has offices in 600 cities around the country. His businesses hire over 500,000 people, 500,000 people a year. He places them, it's temporary work, into work all sorts of professions, accountants, retail, nurses, everything you can think of, nuclear engineers. And one of the things that he told me in this interview is he said he believes, and he's been in this business for 30 years, that your generation, the millennials, he said to me, there's something about this generation that does not have the same work ethic that the past generations did. Now, I don't know if he's right or not. I mean, he's on the front line of the employment, in the employment field. I hope he is wrong, because, the other thing that he told me, by the way, is there are 3 things that you need to do as a young person. If you can pass these 3 qualifications, he said, in a heartbeat, he can find you a job. Number 1, you have to have the work ethic. And what does that mean? It means you're willing to, go the extra mile to get the job done. It means you're willing to, you're not just there to punch a clock, right? It's not that you don't believe that you're entitled to a job, that you have to earn the job. It means that, you might have to get your hands dirty and things like that you have an attitude, you show up on time. That's work ethic. Number 2, you have to have integrity. You're an honest person, right? You're not going to steal. You're not going to defraud the organization. Integrity is hugely important. Are you a person of character? Number 3, can you pass a drug test? Now, we may laugh and think, pass a drug. He said, 2 out of every 5 people that they interview can't even pass a drug test. You know, that's a big problem with our modern society. The point I'm making, this is so important. Do not feel like you're entitled to a job, because you know what? You're not. You're not entitled to a job. Nobody is required to hire you. You have to make the sale. Right? You have to prove to that employer that you're worth it to that person, and you're going to work your butts off to help make his company successful. And if you go to work with that kind of attitude, I guarantee you, and Bob Funk, who knows a hell of a lot more than I do about this, he guarantees you will be a success in your life. So those are things to think about.
Thanks. Was there a question on this side?
I have kind of a question and a comment as far as you're discussing the innovation and entitlement, with it pointed out that the government spending is out of control. They do a poor job of it. When you think about what we're spending, how would you think about Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment, disability, welfare, all those entitlement programs? Don't you think the culture has to change their perspective so that we don't expect our government to do that? Especially with the upcoming or pending Affordable Care Act. How's that going to impact it?
So that's a big question. That's a really big question. What you're basically saying is, like, when you look at that federal budget and you look at the $3.6 trillion we spend every year, half of that is these entitlement programs: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And it's interesting to me, this is a roundabout way of answering your question. The 4 of us have talked about the economy for the last hour and 20 minutes or so. And we haven't mentioned the most important thing that is going to happen to America by far economically over the next 10 and 20 years. This is seismic change that's going to happen in our economy in the next 10 or 20 years. And what is that? Baby boomers, right? How many of you in this room are a baby boomer? Are you a boomer? There are 86 million of us. There's 86 million baby boomers. We are the biggest, most selfish generation in American history, right? And we have gotten everything we've wanted all our lives. And guess what? There's fewer of you all than there are of us baby boomers. So the pyramid is inverting, right? It used to be we had, when you talk about when Social Security and Medicare, when Social Security was created, we had 20 people working for every person who was getting a Social Security check, right? So it worked just fine, And you all know Social Security is just a pay-as-you-go system, right? It's not a funded retirement system. Now we have 3 people working for every retired person. In 25 years, when you're all on the peak of your earning years, there will be 2 of you working for every retired person. So the way I always put it is, every young person in this room should just pair up and just send 15% of your paycheck to me while I'm playing golf in Palm Beach, right? Because that's the way it's going to work. And so the question is, can that system stay afloat? And I always put it like this: you have all seen the movie, right? Everyone in this room has seen the movie. It's called the Titanic, right? And the Titanic is headed to the iceberg. We can see it. We all know this, right? Everyone in this room knows the Titanic of Social Security and Medicare is headed to the iceberg, right? Everyone knows that. And the question gets to the question about our politicians. Can they have the wisdom and the foresight and the courage to turn this big luxury liner around before we hit the iceberg? And we don't have a lot of time, quite frankly. Because you know what? Within 10 years, most of the baby boomers are going to be in retirement. And think about that. That means right now, most of us baby boomers, we're in our mid-late 50s. We're in the peak of our earning years, right? So we're paying all sorts of tax. I don't know about you. I'm paying all sorts of tax right now. I'm sure you are too. In 10 years, we're going to be living off of you all. So we're not going to be paying into the system. We're going to be collecting the benefits. And the whole thing really collapses at that stage. And so the real question is, can we do this? Now, what's the solution? I've been preaching this for 25 years. We have to move Social Security from a pay-as-you-go system to a system that is self-financed. So I want to make a deal to every single young person in this room. Let's get rid of Social Security and move it to a system where when you start working and you start earning a paycheck, you take each one of your paychecks and you get to put 10% of that paycheck into a personal, individual retirement account that you own and that will accumulate interest and that the government can never take away from you, right? And you will accumulate that money over the next 40 years. And the most, you said this in a roundabout way, the most powerful force in the universe, this was said by Albert Einstein, the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Right? And that was exactly the point you were making. Compound interest. If you can start saving at the age of 21 and 22 and 23, even if it's just 10% of your paycheck, and you put that into an account that you own, and with bonds and stocks in it over 40 years, you're going to be a pension millionaire when you retire. Now, how many of you in this room like that deal? Or do you want to keep paying into a system that's probably going to pay you nothing? Right? And that's what, Republicans or Democrats have to appeal to your generation. One last thing about this, because this is for the kids. When I was growing up in the 60s, I remember, I'm sure you guys remember all the anti-Vietnam War rallies and the big rally that they had in front of the National Capitol, the famous one in 1969, and all the kids, with their long hair and stuff, they were chanting, "Hell no, we won't go. Hell no, we won't go." And you know what they did? They burned their draft cards. Now here is my fantasy for what's going to happen to your generation. I want to see your generation of millennials. I want to see 1 million of you in front of the Capitol inside of Washington, D.C., chanting, "Hey, hey, we won't pay. Hey, hey, we won't pay," and burning your Social Security cards. Now that would be a revolution.
Okay, we have time for one more question, so make it a good one.
Gentlemen, the United States started out as a very productive country with 90% of its population doing productive work as farmers. Today, the farmers are only about 5% of the population. It's also understood...
Who is? The farmers?
The farmers.
Farmers, right.
We started out with about 95% of our population as farmers, as productive people, producing things. Today, when you and speak of Obama, we have over 1 million, and Obama was part of this, over 1 million nonprofit organizations that employ people in this country. According to the Federal Reserve, almost 10% of our population is doing nothing but moving money around. They're cashiers, they're working for banks, working for credit unions. They're 10% of our population doing nothing but moving money around. So it's very strange what's going on in the United States. So how do you address that when we have fewer and fewer people actually producing products and resources, like we said earlier, like with fracking and stuff like that?
First of all, my answer would be that doesn't frighten me. You can say that 10% of the people are moving money around, but those are services that we value in a marketplace. I didn't just walk up to somebody and say, "I'd like to move your money around. Pay me." There was a market for that, and the market worked beautifully, I would say. So, and I feel blessed that instead of 95% of the people growing food, we can do it with 2% of the people in this country growing food for us. What a testimony to the technological progress that we've seen in machinery, in land management, in seed management, in all sorts of things. So, to me, it's backward looking, but what a source of hope, because that's the very thing that could lead us as we move into the future as well. So, do we consume too many services? I don't know. That one I don't have an answer for. Should we be consuming more food? Well, probably not, right? We're a pretty obese country. So, so the question then is this the right mix? I have to trust that the market has given us the right mix, subject to all the impediments and frictions that the government has thrown at us.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. And I would again like to thank all of you for coming to this inaugural event of the Hammond Institute. Inaugural means there are going to be more, so look for those. And we have some bookmarks, I believe, out on the tables outside, and peruse the tables out in the lobby for information about the Hammond Institute and its various centers. And also I'd like to thank again John Hammond for his generosity. And I should point out not just his generosity in establishing this institute, but in his generosity over the many years as integral part of the leadership on our board of directors, bringing about this fantastic university that you're able to visit today. And if some of you hadn't been to St. Charles in a while or had been to Lindenwood before, you probably had the same experience that many people do, which is, where the heck did all this come from? And a lot of it was due to John and his generation of the board of directors and their leadership. So I'd like to thank John and also President Evans. And there are also refreshments out in the lobby, so you can hang around and mill about a bit, and thank you very much.